Dr. Ranjit Tiga, Director, XIDAS, respected chief guest of today's function, Shri Anthony Disa, Chief Secretary, Government of Madhya Pradesh, His Excellency Alois Rubuka, Ambassador of Burundi to India, Dr. Sarah Varghese, Regional Director of CBM, Professor Malcolm Harper, our keynote speaker for the day, and Professor Mehul Chavan on the stage, on the dais, as well as all of you assembled here in this very beautiful campus. A very good morning, and from the part of the world where I come from, a very warm Johar. First of all, I'd like to thank XIDAS, Father Ranjit Tiga and Professor Mehul Chavan for having invited me in particular and Tata Steel. This is the second year running that Tata Steel has been fortunate to be part of this program. In fact, we have a fairly long association with the Jesuit Society, both XLRI in Jamshedpur and XITE outside Jamshedpur, XISS in Ranchi, and XIMB Bhubaneswar. We have very strong associations with all these institutions, and I'm glad that we are continuing that tradition with XIDAS as well. Of course, XLRI being housed in Jamshedpur, we have ongoing work with XLRI, be it the JRD Tata Chair for Business Ethics at XLRI, or the JRD Tata Chair for Sustainable Development at XISS in Ranchi. Also, I would like to inform, and not many people would know, that Father Michael Thanraj, who is the provincial of the Jamshedpur Jesuit Society, is a member of the CSR Advisory Council at Tata Steel. So thank you once again for inviting us and allowing us to be part of this yet another Jesuit institution. As far as sustainable development and CSR is concerned, whilst I'm going to be speaking at length later on today in the program, just some initial thoughts. Of course, I'm proud to be part of a company and of a group that probably, if you allow me to be a little bit immodest, pioneered CSR in this country, and I dare say across the world. Much before the term became fashionable, Tata Steel in particular and the Tata Group in general have practiced CSR like bread and butter. In fact, the founder of the Tata Group, Jamshedji Nusarwanji Tata, more than a century back, I think he was a visionary, because for someone to have said something like, the community is not just another stakeholder for a business, but is in fact the very purpose of its existence, the very raison d'etre. For someone to have said something more than a century back was a visionary. And it was not just a statement, it was internalized in the DNA of the company and of the group. And ever since, successive leaders of the Tata Group have only furthered this philosophy. As we move forward, I believe we also need to introspect, take stock of the changed paradigms, the changed imperatives of development, of sustainable development. And there are cutting-edge work that has happened in this area across the world, and we need to learn from them. And I'm very fortunate to be part of this conference today, to be able to learn from all of you as to what is happening in different parts of the country, and indeed looking at the audience in different parts of the world as well. Lastly, again, I would like to thank the organizers for presenting a very beautiful representation of Gandhi Ji, a very tribal depiction of Gandhi Ji. And which reminds me, especially since there are so many students sitting there, of the wisdom in many of Gandhi's and probably all of Gandhiji's quotes. And one such I'm reminded of at this point is be the change you want to see in the world. And I think institutions like these only further that philosophy, because in today's context, especially with CSR becoming more and more fashionable, India having legislated a landmark Companies Act 2013, which mandates corporates to spend a percentage of their profits on CSR, and probably the only country in the world to do so. There is all the more need for qualified, passionate, professional development personnel and lots of capacity that is required in this field. And I'm glad that XIDAS is adding to that cause. Thank you once again for inviting me. I had brought a presentation, but I think I will refrain from showing it because it's pretty long, and in the interest of time, I will just try to share some thoughts on CSR. First, some background about Tata Group and Tata Steel. I'm sure Tata Group does not need introduction to this audience, but I'm sure there are certain facets which not many people are aware of, and it merits talking over here. It is more than a 150-year-old group. So clearly, when they talk of sustainability, I'm sure they know what sustainability means, to have survived for so long, and to have not just survived, but also flourished. More than $100 billion revenue with 350,000 employees all around the world. Several large companies, Tata Steel of course being one, Tata Motors, Tata Consultancy Services, Indian Hotels, Tata Chemicals, etc., etc. Not many people know that the holding company of all these Tata companies is called Tata Sons, which is a privately held, unlisted company. So you can imagine it's a very rich company. And 2/3 of the equity of Tata Sons is held by philanthropic trusts. The Ratan Tata Trust, the Dorabji Tata Trust, and several such trusts. And these trusts, in turn, disburse grants to small, medium, large NGOs across the country with an annual disbursement of more than 500 crore rupees across the country. I guess even this auditorium was in large measure due to a grant given by Sir Dorabji Tata Trust. So that's the background in which the Tata Group has operated, without much hype, without much noise. When I come to Tata Steel, one of the older companies in the group, larger companies in the group, a 10 million ton steel company which started off in 1907, so it's already finished more than 100 years. Again, not many people know that most of India's labor laws, and some of them probably even at a global level, were first introduced in Tata Steel, and subsequently they went on to become law in the country. So for example, 8-hour working day, or gratuity, or maternity benefits, or pension, all these were introduced by Tata Steel much before they were enacted as law in the country, and some of these measures were first of their kind anywhere in the world. Lastly, some of India's most enduring institutions also owe their origins to the Tata Group. And again, I don't think many people know that the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, or the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, the National Center for the Performing Arts in Mumbai, and the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, the Energy Research Institute, which earlier used to be called the Tata Energy Research Institute in Delhi, the Tata Cancer Hospital in Mumbai, and of recent origin is the Tata Cancer Hospital in Kolkata, and likewise several such institutions which have endured over a period of time have all been set up by the Tata Group. Coming more specifically to Tata Steel and how we look at CSR. I think there are a few fundamental reasons why we do CSR. Of course, it is to do good. But if I have to put it in a business framework, one bucket, if I have to put it in some buckets as to what are the reasons why we do CSR, because that's important to know for ourselves as well. Of course, is a legacy issue. It is, as I mentioned in the morning, it's a philosophical thing. It's there in our DNA. B, whether we like it or not, we have impacts. And in the morning, the keynote speaker also talked about some of these impacts. We have a very high environmental footprint, being in the mining and extractive industry in the metal space. And we also, to a certain extent, change the cultural fabric of a place. So we have impacts. And if we have impacts, I think we have the responsibility as well to mitigate those impacts. Second fundamental reason why we do CSR is the onus is on us to mitigate the impacts for which we are responsible. The third reason, and this is very peculiar to our situation, is that we are present in that part of the country, and economics theory talks of resource curse. Wherever there are resources, those areas typically remain underdeveloped. We are present in those states in the country which, if you pick up any socio-economic indicator, be it per capita GDP, be it infant mortality, be it nutritional values, be it literacy levels, Jharkhand, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, the states where we are present, be worse off than the national average and way off from the best in the So very poor socioeconomic status, and this, if you couple with the sense of left-wing extremism and abysmal levels of political governance and political maturity, then you have a very peculiar problem. So to that developmental agenda, I think that's the third reason we do CSR. Fourth is, of course, a mandatory provision which I talked about briefly in the morning, which is the Companies Act 2013. But that's a very recent thing. We've been doing for more than 100 years, and we've been spending probably more than what is being mandated. But now, of course, it will be more in the compliance mode. We will have to at least ensure that we are compliant with what the law says. So if you have to find out the reasons why companies do CSR, I'm sure each company has some compelling reasons. For Tata Steel, these are broadly the buckets of reasons why we do CSR. What do we do? As I mentioned, in the areas where we are, largely some of them are accessible, very poorly developed, and a complete breakdown of existing political systems, the state machinery and the development which is by the state machinery. By default, we end up becoming quasi-government. So we end up doing everything in those areas, right from culture to agriculture and everything in between. Health, education, skills, culture, livelihoods, sports, infrastructure, environment, disaster, and something which is unique to what we do is to preserve and promote tribal culture. And I will talk upon that in a bit. On each of these verticals, we would have a range of initiatives that we would be doing, some in a project mode, some in a very programmatic mode. I would like to share one particular project with you, and I would request your attention on that because I believe this is a unique project where we have demonstrated how business principles and how a very intuitive TQM approach can be used to solve seemingly untractable, unsolvable social problems. This is to do with reduction of infant and maternal mortality. In Jharkhand, there is a district called Saraikela Kharsawa, and one of the blocks in that district is the block of Saraikela. When we started this project in 2010, which is 4 years before, the infant mortality rate IMR of Saraikela block was 68. So for every 1,000 live births, 68 children would die in the first year of birth. I'm sure these numbers must have been grossly underreported. So when we started doing in this block, which has 167 villages, we said let's take the entire block, because if you start showing impacts, you need to do it over at least one administrative area, and the smallest administrative area could be a block. So we started doing this project in a multi-collaborative mode. So lots of partnerships with the National Rural Health Mission. Now, of course, it's become the National Health Mission. With the health authorities of Saraikela Kharsawa district. Tata Steel, of course, anchoring this project. With both funding and technical support from the American India Foundation. And a very technical support from an organization called XIDAS, which is based in Gadchiroli in Maharashtra, which is spearheaded by Abhay and Rani Bang. And they have done some seminal work in this area. So we started working in these villages, and we did a baseline survey, and we found lots of deaths, a few births. And then we analyzed the causes of those deaths. First of all, we found out that more than 90% of these deaths were in the first 20 days of birth, which is called the neonatal stage. So we said, if we want to target the problem of infant mortality, we need to target crucial vulnerable period in the child's life, which is the first 28 days. Then we analyzed the causes of these deaths. And among the various causes of deaths that we found that there are three major causes. We did a Pareto analysis of causes of deaths. And the three major causes of deaths accounted for nearly 83% of deaths. And these causes were asphyxia, suffocation at the time of birth, sepsis, which is the most common cause, which is infection, and the third is hypothermia, which is children start shivering because either they are pre-deliveries or they are low birth weight babies. So these three causes accounted for 83% of all neonatal deaths. We said let's target these three causes, because if you target these three, you would have taken care of the majority of the problem. How do we do this? The reality is that most deliveries, even today, despite all the provisions and the incentives of the Janani Suraksha Yojana, even today in large parts of rural India, deliveries still take place at home. A, because the primary health center or health sub-center is at a distance, bad roads. Chances are that even if you arrange for a transportation and somehow manage to reach the health center, chances are that it will be defunct, there won't be a doctor over there. Even if there is a doctor and your delivery has taken place in the most hygienic and safe manner, in today's time and age, both the mother and the child are discharged within 48 hours, within 2 days. So they are back to their vulnerable, no one to fend for them, no one to take care of them without any access to qualified medical health service. The A&M who is supposed to visit the village rarely goes to the village. So it's a difficult nut to crack. So we said, how do we solve this problem? Fortunately, under the NRHM, every village in the country, there is a Saiya or a Asha Didi who is a village volunteer. In Chhattisgarh, they are called Mitanins. In Jharkhand, they are called Saiyas. And these are voluntary health workers of the government of India. They are not paid. Most of them are political appointees, unfortunately. Many of them are either illiterate or even illiterate. But we said resource exists. Let us train the Saiyas and let us train them on the concept popularized by Dr. Abhay, which is home-based neonatal care. Let's train them on the methods and techniques to reduce those 3 major causes of death. So we started an intensive round of training. Actually not one, but several rounds of training, 6 rounds of training, right from understanding pregnancies, to measuring the weight of the baby, to taking the temperature of the baby, to identifying early danger signals, arranging for transportation, and learning how to use a mucus extractor, learning how to use a baby warmer, learning how to administer medicines for infection, including cotrimoxazole. And over a period of time, and measuring a lot of process indicators. What is the weight of the baby? How many babies were born at home? How many were born in the hospital? How many were low birth weight, etc., etc. Over a period of time.
Can you please wind up?
Yeah. Over a period of time, we found that not just the process indicators improved, but as of June 2013, which is the last comprehensive data set that I have, we saw a 20% reduction in neonatal mortality. And that is very encouraging. If we can demonstrate, because governments try to get, even if they get 2%, they are very happy. We got a 20% reduction in neonatal mortality. If we can do it in one back of beyond block of Saraikela district, and not just for 1 year, over a sustained period of time for 4 years, I'm sure this can be scaled up to a much larger area. So we're now talking to the government of Jharkhand to see how we can scale it up at a statewide level. The reason why I narrated this case study is to drive home the point that even for social issues and difficult, complex social issues like infant mortality, application of business-driven principles and having a very research-driven methodology can bring about phenomenal, significant changes. Whilst we do a whole range of initiatives, I don't want to bore you with them, and maybe at a later date I can interact with students and share some of our work. I'll seek your indulgence for a moment, the chair of the session, to just share, because since many of you have come from abroad and this might interest you. There is one area that we work, and I dare say again, very few companies in India especially, and I don't know, maybe even around the world, would be working on preserving, not just preserving, but also promoting indigenous tribal cultures. We work on preserving tribal scripts, whether it is the Old Chiki script of the Santals or the Warang Shiti script of the Ho community, including the Tolong Siki script of the Kuduk language of the Orang community. And as we speak, 10,000 tribal youth across the Kolhan region are learning these languages. And likewise, for tribal music and dance, for tribal musical instruments, for tribal sports. I don't know how many of you have heard of sports like Hati or Sekor or Chur or Ramdel or even Bahuchor, which, don't get me wrong, it is not an adult sport. It is not about stealing someone's wife. It is a very innocent sport. And we have literally revived some of these sports from the dead. They were long buried. We found mention of them in some archives, in some diary, and revived them from the dead. Because I believe, and my company believes, that it is important to be in step with modern times. It is important to know English and Hindi and learn the latest supercomputers and to the moon. But one has to be rooted, firmly rooted in one's own culture and one's own identity. And that is the reason why we do a lot of work on this. We are asked several questions as to why do you do this? If it is meant to die out or become extinct, so be it. It is a law of survival. But I believe there are values which are inherent in local, tribal, indigenous cultures, and it is incumbent on all of us. It is our responsibility to preserve and protect these cultures. In the end, I would just like to leave a few thoughts with you. The concept of CSR has moved beyond the traditional practice of philanthropy or charity. Today, CSR is something which can be measured, and there are several metrics available for measurement. You can think of the Human Development Index and many more. We are looking at new paradigms in sustainability. In the morning, Professor Harper did mention about some of them. And I think it's no longer important for companies to only talk about CSR, but to look at sustainability. And from ITC, we have Champion in Sustainability, and they've done phenomenal work on water. It's important to work on various aspects of sustainability, whether it is the supply chain, whether it is contractual labor, whether it is ethics and human rights, whether it is learning from nature, biomimicry, whether it is social entrepreneurship. The latest concept is shared value creation, which is a Porter-Kramer model. I think the world has moved far beyond, but at the end of the day, we have to always answer two simple questions. Are we doing the right things, and are we doing things right? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your time, for your indulgence. Once again, Johar.